let me say I started off really enjoying The Familiar, okay? Leigh Bardugo's writing is just so good. It's so fresh and exciting compared to what I have been reading lately. Let's just say that. And here's the thing, I almost didn't pick this one up because I kept saw these reviews. I kept hearing people say about how bad it was, that it's not worth it, that the time period's all wrong, and it's other stuff. But I said, you know what, let me just read a chapter or so and see how it feels. And next thing I know, I'm halfway through the book in like an hour, 30 minutes, whatever. And that just goes to show you that you really can't take everybody's words on what to say. You need to try it for yourself. Let's just say that was true up until about halfway. So one thing what I noticed about this book is how much her writing reminds me of Stephen King's writing. She has this knack for like weaving in these side characters and their lives. Like it'll randomly veer off into what they're doing, and that's something he does. He will go into like almost a page worth of a random character's life, from the moment they're born to like something important in their life until like what happened to them. And that's something she does. I don't know if she's doing it on purpose, but it almost feels emulated on purpose. It doesn't hit the same as when he does it. And I feel like it's because it's obvious that that's what he's trying to do. And this could be a good thing and a bad thing. Like for him, I don't know what it is about him. When he does it, you expect it. It's like, oh yeah, this is classic King. There's another side character. But when she does it, it's like she's doing it with this intention at the end to put like a hot seat, like they went through some kind of lesson and learned something, and it comes off a little forced, almost a little bit different. Also, don't mind my notes right here, okay? I spent like 4 or 5 hours last night, okay, ranting about this book, and you're gonna hear all of it. If I had to read it, you have to hear it. Okay, on the surface, this book is categorized as adult. And I admit, I was really happy to see that because at this point, I've about given up completely on YA. I can't do it anymore. I just can't. Part of me thought this was YA by how it reads. Yeah, like it almost feels like YA to the point where I was actually had to double check to make sure that I didn't misread and that it wasn't YA and I misread that adult. Like, the tones and the themes are mature, yeah, but there's something about it that feels almost immature. It's really hard to explain. For instance, there's a tournament arc, and that just screams YA vibes to me, doesn't it? Something else is, I've seen some people criticize a few times in some other books that just because you throw in adult, like dirty jokes, doesn't make it an adult book. And while I agree with that, that is some stuff that really adults do. It's not like it should be a surprise or like, oh my gosh, she said this or that. No. It's something you get used to as an adult, so it's not that surprising. So I think it really depends on what the reader prefers. If you're looking something for like a heavier, dark, more adult tone, like my shameless book luck here, for instance, then you might be a bit disappointed with this one because it falls on the lighter side. But if you're okay with like mixing YA tropes in an adult package, then I think this will work for you. Because there's a common thing I see with books that claim to be adult fantasy tend to be pretty boring, and they tend to be a bit more depressing than they have to be. Like, just because you're an adult automatically makes you depressed as a hero in a fantasy book, which I don't like that trend. So I do like in this one that it's still considered adult without being like super depressing. It's hard to explain because it is a bit depressing, but it's not like too depressing. I don't know. Okay. Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about this book too much because there are some heavy themes in here that are a bit out of my pay grade. Like, I'm not qualified to talk about history and social status and all this other stuff. But to be fair, I don't think this book is either. Okay, it's just supposed to be a dumb, mindless, entertaining fantasy book. And the major issue that I have with this book is it tries way too hard to be something it's not. And by that I'm talking about the preachy, the holier than thou stuff that we got, self-righteousness going on in this book. It's a bit much. Okay, so please don't take it the wrong way when I get into these topics because they're a bit heavy no matter where they're coming from. Something I did like about this book is her writing, let's say, to where it always, again, I will always praise the writing style because it always flows so elegantly and it's fun to read. It keeps you engrossed. Just the word choice and the sentences. When I first started this book, I thought the another character was the main character, but then the spotlight shifts to our true protagonist, and I thought that was a really cool rendition because I couldn't tell at first whether this was like a multi-POV or if this was like an overhead shot of all the characters, I should say, but then it focuses on one later on, and I realized so that's kind of tricky, but I like that. I like to be tricked. Don't get angry at me, okay? Because I will screw up these names. There's no might about it. I probably will screw up these names. Lucia. Is that how you say it? Please tell me that's how you say it. Lucia. She's fascinating. There's this underlying threat for her in this book because she is secretly Jewish of heritage background. And at certain times, they make it feel like this is going to be a big backstory or a big plot point in the book. They keep warning her, oh, don't let them find out about this because of how they used to treat us and whatnot. Like, yeah, they don't do it openly anymore, but it's still suggested that it could cause problems for you if they found out about it. But it turned out to be more of a background detail that doesn't really come into play that much. I mean, it's mentioned a few times here out as sort of like a mysterious background, but they make it seem like oh no, somebody's going to find out and this is what's going to happen. So I was like, because they kind of use it to amplify this setting on this predetermined Christianity hate thing that we're going to see coming up here pretty soon, and like it's not subtle at all. Okay, there's no subtlety in this book, like whatsoever. It felt like the book was using her heritage more as a way to underscore the broader theme of religion and the religious fear and prejudice, should we say. That's like the main reason that they actually included it at all. On top of that, she has the ability to do some magic. We're going to say magic because she doesn't fully understand it, and nobody fully understands it. For example, there's a point where she tries to multiply coins in an effort to get rich, because of course, if you find out you can do that, that's going to be one of the first things you try, right? And it backfires in this hilarious way, actually. They usually multiply to something worse, like spiders. And her family's reaction is pretty funny, because they're like, oh, you think we didn't try that? Like, if we could have done that, we'd be rich by now. Yeah, and you can't blame a girl for trying, right? Another time she gets caught actually fixing some burnt bread into good bread, and that's actually what sets the story off to begin with, because her powers become noticed. And these are like easy mistakes, but they're habits of hers, so like she does them every day without realizing she's doing this magic. And like there's so much potential here. It's a bit strange. It's almost like it's like small house magic, but it's actual magic. It's hard to explain because they don't actually explain it. It's an interesting setup, really, when you start reading the book. It does get your attention, but I do wish that mentioning her heritage at all had some kind of importance to do with the plot, instead of just being there to add tension and fuel for this whole Christian thing. I know there's history and whatnot, but this is a fantasy story. So when you do that, it almost starts to feel like you're trying to make a documentary instead of an actual story. Okay, probably my biggest gripe here, I don't really want to talk about it because, like I said, all this stuff is out of my pay grade, but it has to be said because this is intentionally put in this book for a reason. It's on the nose. It's almost like a documentary, as if it's trying to make a statement, and a political statement. And I can't stand it when this stuff is in my fantasy books. It's false marketing. But the biggest criticism I have here is the men hate. There is a strong hate of men in this book. The feminists are going to probably lose their mind, but here we go. If you get down to the basics, there's nothing wrong with how it is. And that's great if you're into that dynamic. For, powerful female heroine, that's right up your alley. That's cool. And she's cool. Like, I love her as a character. There's nothing wrong with her. But there's just straight up sentences that the author writes in here that are almost, it's like, who hurt you? Every single man in this book is portrayed in a negative light. For instance, Valentina's husband, for instance, is described as the best she could do, even though he's never home. On their wedding night, he got so drunk that he threw up and never touched her again. Instead, he spends all of his time gambling and doting on racehorses. There's the son of an old cook who Lucio works with. He's clearly infatuated with this woman, playwright, so he's gone all the time, leaving his poor old mom to work in the kitchen alone doing the chores and whatnot. Even the aunt has admitted to playing up to her husband's exotic taste just to land a good husband, a good home, have somebody provided for her. She wants for nothing. It's the whole, like, yeah, I'll cry in my new Lamborghini mindset. I remember thinking, oh boy, if there's a love interest coming up, this doesn't bode well for them. This is how all the other men are treated. I can't wait to see this. Even in these, like, small random moments, the negativity is blatantly insane. They're like at a dinner one time, and then they have this random obnoxious man tell a dirty joke. And then he also says, like, oh, God gave them beauty to tempt us, and speech to drive us mad. Ha ha, yeah. And then later on, Lucia's telling an experience randomly about her first time is when she is giving a bath to an old man, and he forced her to touch him or something. So she kind of defended herself, and that was the only experience she's had. Of course, right? And there's another moment where another character literally says the words, fear men. And I don't know. I mean, that's not really the kind of message I want to spread, you know? It's not really a message I want to send. I just feel like that's what's wrong with the world these days. You can't fight negativity by fueling it, encouraging it, or adding more to it. Fight fire with fire doesn't work in that kind of aspect. The book starts pushing this narrative, the idea that men are dangerous in general. And I understand that this kind of dynamic is excusable because of the time frame that the book is written in. It almost feels like that's on purpose, like as an excuse to do it. Like, oh, this book was written in historical times, so I can hate on men all I want to. And it's not what you should be thinking. You should be focusing on, like, the plot, the action, the magic stuff, the drama, not these political opinions. It feels like the story is saying, watch out for men, don't talk to them, don't look at them, whatever. When you're doing this, you're essentially giving people power. When you are saying so much that you're encouraging someone to be afraid of someone so much, you're giving them power on accident, because that just makes you afraid. Like, that's counterintuitive what you're trying to say. Are you following me here? It's an excuse for the story to be, like, disguised as an actual fantasy story. And yeah, this might resonate with some readers, especially in these modern times, these, extreme feminists. It just feels a bit heavy-handed. And it got kind of old sometimes, because I swear to God, you couldn't turn a single page without some kind of comment about men or a man in general. So yeah, the further on I got, the more my excitement started to wane, because instead of, like, focusing on the plot, it doubled down on the negativity, and it started just preaching this thing about, like, it's almost like trying to brainwash you into saying hate men or hate Christians. Double points if it's both. And while I'm not really religious or anything, I don't think it's a good idea to be prejudiced against anything. And encouraging hate against anyone is never a good story, in my opinion. There's even a moment where somebody asks, did he hurt you? And she responds, well, he's a man, so yes. Like, it's not subtle at all. Okay, even the main love interest, because there's gonna be one, right? At this point, I'm surprised that it wasn't a female. There's another scene, and like there's a girl in a prison or whatever, and it's time for her to bathe before she's like to be executed or something. Let's just say that. And her thought immediately goes to, well, I should bathe, but I don't want to make myself look pretty and give men something to look at, so I'm not going to do that. Why would your thoughts immediately go to that? How about you bathe because you want to? How about I bathe because I like to be clean? How about I don't give a fuck who's looking at me? Yeah, you know? Why did your thoughts immediately go there? You're just screwing yourself at that point. And then I did notice, okay, this is an overly pattern. This is why I'm ranting on about it so much, because it's throughout the entire book. Like, it's not just a subtle thing here or there. It's literally every single character, almost on like every other page. Like, I am not joking. Even the women in this book, the ones that are portrayed to be as like bitchy or bad in the beginning, turn out to be overly redeemed by the time the ending comes. The whore who like steals somebody's son, well, it turns out to actually be a lesbian at the end, and who has some good advice about like living freely and enjoying your life. So they make it seem like the boy is the creepy one, and it's not her who stole, who seduced him or whatever. Even the bitchy woman character that we kind of start off with is redeemed in the end because she tries to save our heroine, despite all the mean stuff that she's done through her throughout the book. She's ultimately trying to be her redemption arc in the end. It's crazy. And like they're also they have these moments where our main character sympathizes with her because of her situation that she's in. Where it's almost like from one girl to another. It's weird. Even at one point, there's a woman who is like on the road, and you see, I'm being very careful to avoid too many spoilers, right? But I'm just saying a woman. But there's a woman who's on the road, and her husband, of course, has sent somebody to get rid of her because she's inconvenienced. She's an inconvenience now. And also, this husband has also had a girlfriend on the side. Go figure, right? Because man, and he orders, her to get gone, and she puts up a fight against these two guys, and of course, one suggests having his way with her before they kill her, because that's what men do, right? And she manages to take one of them out with her while she goes. I can't believe how much I ended up writing about this, because there's just that much to go on. It doesn't stop there. There's an extra paragraph added in about this. Even to like a simple sidetrack detail where some gems end up in a fish, and a random woman that we've never seen before, finds this fish, finds the gem in the fish, leaves her abusive husband, thrives in a whole different life separate from him, and he is forced to cook the fish by himself because his wife left him. But don't get me wrong though, there is one guy in here who seems like he is a total nice guy. He's charming, and he's almost pathetic to the point where he knows he's being used in his position or whatnot. And then the script hilariously flips, almost cartoonishly, by saying, haha, just kidding, I'm actually the villain. And it's these kind of things that make it feel YA. Like, it almost feels written for an anime, and it's like super over the top the way that it's done. I don't know how we got here. I don't know why I put up with this. This wasn't fun. This wasn't fun for me at all. Where's the action? Where's the drama? Where's the magic? Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with mindless entertainment. I will put up with a lot of stuff and turn my brain off just to enjoy the story. And there's nothing wrong with the focus on female empowerment, because that's important. Everybody should be important. But it's really hard to ignore and enjoy when the story keeps going back to the same message over and over and over about how men are dangerous, untrustworthy, to where it starts to feel more like a lecture, as if like this is new news to people who's never heard of this concept. Like it's trying to force or subliminal message you into agreeing with these political opinions. Or if the book's trying to share a locker room high five with you about like how bad men are. And it's a shame because while the writing is just so good, this whole thing brought my rating down from like a 4 to like a 2 from that alone. Okay, I want to go back and talk about something I did like because after all that negativity, it's not like there's nothing good about this book. There are some cool things in here that I've really enjoyed, but I wish were touched more on rather than the previous lecture stuff. For instance, they have this theme of sins, because religion is also a big part in here, which I'll get to later, trust me. But there's this theme of sins, and you can see, if you're looking for it, you can see the 7 sins in like a lot of people who come up, and that's kind of really cool to pay attention to. Like, for instance, we have Pride in Valentina, who is really desperate and eager to show off herself that she belongs in like this social status society, even to the point where sometimes she will step on people to get to what she wants. This need to be seen and respected so much to where it drives her actions. And envy also goes hand in hand with that because there is a lot of wanting what other people have, which is normal, considering when you come from nothing, you always going to want what somebody else has. That whole grass is greener concept, and it works for no matter who you are. Even the richest people always want something somebody else has, because nothing is ever good enough. That's just who we are. We're human. We make mistakes. We sin. That's just who we are. It's a cool concept to actually see it play out in the book, even though it's more subtle. If you're not paying attention to it because of all this other stuff thrown in your face. And I pity her for that because it's hard to watch someone want something that's so far out of their reach and it's just beyond their control to get it. Because at least if I could do something about it, then I would only have myself to blame. But if it's just so far out of their control, it's hard to blame them for it. It's worse when you hit a wall and realize, is this as far as I can go? That jades people. So I understand it when they show her that these periodical looks of sadness, and it almost excuses her for being a mega bitch. And then there's ambition. This one is not so subtle. It's brought up so many times that ambition is going to be the death of our main character. This is supposed to be her weakness, is ambition, that she just always wants more and more and more. And she admits to that. She always says, oh, I'm hungry. I want to eat till I'm full. I want this for myself. Why should I stop here? I can have what I want. And I feel like that's not really a weakness. You should always reach for the stars. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, as long as you can work for it and you have that confidence. And of course, there's other things too. There's always lust. This comes up time and time again, especially when you go back to the whole men thing. A lot of women realize that they have this power to use it. And I mean, that's cool. I mean, if you have the power, you might as well use it. Am I right? There is a quote that I liked about it when they were talking to they keep kind of making fun of our main character because she's not really attractive, and her aunt makes a joke like, "Oh well, if you had beauty, you wouldn't know how to use it." Or something. And I like that because women understand that can be a strength for them. Even though I understand again, it's supposed to be a dig at men for being weak and naive, but at the same time, I like the playfulness of that kind of quote. Where it's not meant to be hateful. It's just a straightforward thing. Now, speaking of, let's talk about characters. I found it a little hard to find somebody to root for in this book because we're obviously supposed to follow the main character, yeah. Let's start with Valentina. I'm not going to stay too long on her because I feel like I've already talked enough about these characters to where you get the gist of it. But again, she's undeniably a bitch, yeah, but she does make us sympathize with her because she is a representation of the life women had back in that time period. And by that I'm talking about like Spain, the 1600s, 1500s, something like that. Women always had it hard in history, of course. A lot of their features depended on who they married or how good they looked or what they had to bring to the table. And she's a product of that system. Yeah, she's bitter and sharp, but you can't help but feel sorry for her when you realize how little control she's actually had over her Then there's our main character, Lucia. And I have to say, she might be worse. She starts off pretty self-pitying, to where like even her aunt makes fun of it. They describe her as somebody who's just kind of there. She walks around, she isn't pretty, she's boring. So at first it feels like we're being set up for this whole Cinderella arc thing where she's supposed to magically evolve into this princess. Honestly, I was kind of hoping her and Valentina ended up together, because there was a bit of tension there in the beginning. Even though I quickly saw that wasn't going to be possible. I was still 50% right, I was halfway right, but some of the choices that our main character makes are just downright confusing. There comes to a point where she's threatened, like, either you show off your powers or we're going to kick you out. And I feel like everybody would know that it's still not the best, that's still almost preferable to showing off your talents, because there's so many people who are going to want to take advantage of you, who are going to want to just, like, there's no way that can be the right answer. But she's just like, I guess I don't have a choice. That said, though, it starts to make sense when you think about how someone like her, who always just lives her life from day to day, boring, sleeps on the floor, she craves more out of life. And you can't blame somebody for that. So when somebody like that gets a small taste of power, let me hit you with what he said.
Give us common folk one taste of power, we're like the lion who tasted man. Nothing is ever so sweet again.
She gets a glimpse of what she can do, and like anybody, you would want more. Because, what if you woke up one day and you found out you can do magic? It always escalates, right? You're like, let me start with, I can, it starts with, I can multiply papers. Then it's like, I wonder if I can print money. So, yeah, it is frustrating to watch her ignore advice over and over again, but at the same time, it's so human that you can't really blame her for being relatable. Nobody likes a character who's too perfect all the time. I just feel like the biggest complaint with her is that she ended up being too boring for some people, because a lot of times nothing really happened, and that wasn't her fault. It's kind of like somebody who just reads the script they're given. She can only do what situation she's put in. Also, that kind of situation also sets off alarm bells for me, because am I like the only one who would think the first time I would see something like that, I would think, oh wow, somebody's going to see that and want to use her powers for their own greed. Because that's the most logical course. Am I right? Why did she not consider that at all? Like, I better not do nothing, or somebody might want to use my stuff. And so why was that not a plot point? Like, aside from the spider thing, I'm going to talk about that later. And back to the whole YA thing, there's another moment in here with her specifically that has one of those I'm not like other girl moments that we all hate by now. It made me roll my eyes a bit. It starts with the classic shopping scene. The ladies are all out picking dresses, and the tailor's all like, he's finding them clothes to get prepared. Some have stuff that complement their eyes, some have their hair, whatnot. And it's her turn, and she's like, oh no, I want to be dressed in armor because I want to be different. And it just feels like a tired trope at this point. I would love to wear a dress. I'm tired of wearing jeans every day. I would love to have a chance to go out and just have an excuse to wear a nice, cute dress for the occasion. But that never comes up. It never comes up. We just don't have excuses or chances to wear dresses anymore, because we have to work all the time now. So again, there's nothing wrong with being traditional. And I can't stand it when they make it seem like they're judging you for wanting to be traditional. Okay, now let's talk about our main love interest. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, even though I can hear it in my head. It's not going to come out the same. But we do get a few chapters from his point of view randomly, and it all just feels like a page out of the emo handbook. He's got these classic tropes of like, I don't feel pain anymore. I let him stab me on purpose because I was bored. And they even force these moments where he's like saving a child or freeing an animal to show us that he's like a secret good guy, even though he's dark and mysterious. Ugh. It feels like it's just ticking every checkbox to let us know that he's tragic, but actually noble on the inside. You know how that goes, secret bad boy with a good heart. If you enjoy that kind of character, and I know it's a very popular trope, so if you enjoy that kind, you'll love this. I really enjoyed his backstory, which is probably one of the more interesting side notes on him, particularly. I love how he got to the situation that he's in now. But I tend to recognize now the whole show not tell thing. And I would enjoy it more if he didn't just spend like 2 pages just telling her through dialogue what happened in his backstory. It just would have been cool, I guess, to see it or have it come out naturally instead of just him just directly telling us. But the story is still cool, so I like that. There's a certain darkness to it that did feel really adult. It puts a spin on the whole anti-religion thing that we're still going to talk about. But then he kind of roads it by becoming sort of a running joke in the story. There's this running gag, I should say, about him blending into the background or with the shadows, that he's so mysterious that a lot of people don't notice when he's been in the room the entire time. And they just kind of, oh, hey, how long have you been there? What are you doing here? And it's supposed to be funny, but nobody laughs. And he keeps like just popping up like this socially awkward vampire. So let's talk about this magic system, or this non-existent magic system. I will say, when I first started this book, I wasn't sure if this book was tied to the Grishaverse or not. I intentionally made it like it's not. Even if it was, I still treated it as a standalone, even though I don't think it was part of it. So, you're supposed to read this book assuming that you knew nothing about anything else, any kind of magic or whatever. So with that in mind, the source of the magic actually remains an entire mystery because it's never actually explained. Even though I do enjoy that there's this like spiritual aspect, mystery to it, there's this ongoing debate in the book of like whether it's holy or unholy. They're always like, oh, is it a miracle from God or is it witchcraft? And this adds a bit of tension because it seems like the answer to that changes depending on who needs it to be. At one point, somebody even says, oh, well, it has to be witchcraft because only Christians can do miracles, not servants. So the ambiguity about it is really cool, especially when like stuff happens to where like she kind of gets angry and causes like fire to flare up at one point. It's dramatic, it's dangerous, and it's unsure whether you think at some point this is going to end up costing her, or if like she's confused about where her power is really coming from. Like if everybody thinks it's holy when it's actually unholy. And especially when you think about how it ties back to the guy, and his side, his backstory. And there's like some unholy magic related there. So it's like it's not like there's no such thing of it existing. It's kind of really cool to try to think about like where the line is blurred when it comes to unholy or holy. It's like the same exact thing, it's just the source of it. But it does become a little frustrating because there's this one rule in every fantasy book about magic, and that's that it should always come at a cost, right? But there's no apparent or active cost for her using her magic at all. Things just kind of happen, and the best explanation that we get is, oh, it's a little Greek, it's a little Jewish, a little Spanish, maybe it's from God, maybe it's not, I don't know. So yeah, they literally say that at some point. You're like, I don't know, it's a little this, a little that, it might be God, it might not be, I don't know. So while it's super vague, they're pretty much just like, you have to be okay with them not telling you. It's very soft magic. There's no hard rules to it at all. Things can just happen depending on circumstance. But don't get me wrong, the magic is some of the cooler parts of it. There's some really cool visual descriptions that we get when she does do something to show off or perform. But then at the same time, it's like it's waving away your questions like, oh, don't worry about where it comes from. Just know that she can do it. Another thing is that you can see all these powerful people like sort of start to swarm around her, like salivating with these powers. And she doesn't seem to take advantage of this. I mean, she does as people just sort of lead her along the way into a higher standard, but she doesn't really take it upon herself. Like she has all these houses playing tug of war with her, and she doesn't realize the position she's in to start making bargains. She just kind of takes what she's given because it's better than what she had. And for me, I think it's weird that these people never stop and think, oh, maybe we shouldn't treat her like a dog because she could maybe turn on us and incinerate us. They never once crossed their mind. They kind of treat her as a pet the entire time. And then she's like, yes, that's me. I'm a servant girl with big dreams. And yeah, I mean, they mentioned that, at some point, at some circumstance, their positions have changed. But she still doesn't really flaunt or exercise that. She just kind of respects her place, actually falls into it. Personally, I think it would have been more interesting if it played out like the cover shows, because that's the impression I got when I think about the words "the familiar," which really have nothing to do with her per se, at least from the initial part. I think it would have been more dramatic, maybe. I mean, it would have been bad for her, but it would have been more dramatic if she had been imprisoned or something and then forced to use her magic to make these things that people wanted, like making gold or building ships, until it backfires spectacularly. And they make a point of saying that she specifically can't do that because her magic is to be used for good, not evil. And they point this out very clearly, that the one time she tries it, there's consequences, yes. But it also, by doing that, by like forcing her to look like just a good guy, it prevents her from being on the fun, morally gray side, to where this could have been a better story. Instead, we actually just get like this political lecture about all this other stuff about religion, men, and it disguised. I mean, whatever. And magic is really just a tool that's used in the background. To, like, sometimes stuff happens. The only actual rules that it had was that it had to be sung. And you can't use it for, like, greed. Okay, easy, right? I mean, to combat that, you would just have to cover her mouth. Am I right? That would be an excellent weakness. Because you know how easy it would be to prevent her from using her magic? And she would have to think of these clever ways to get past this barrier? But no, you know what actually happens? He comes in her room, her love interest, so to say, and then he's like, oh, well, just try it without actually saying it. Try speaking the words in your head and see if that works. She tries it. Guess what? It works. So she doesn't even have to say it out loud anymore. So there goes her only, like, potential barrier to using her magic. What's the point? Okay, now we talked about magic, let's talk about another huge criticism I had. And that was this theme of hating on religion. Organized religion. So, my biggest critique here, aside from the whole hate on men thing, is that this book can come off a little pretentious when it deals with how it handles religion, especially Christianity, to be more specific. It almost starts to feel preachy about the backwards ways of Christianity. And you start to get to a very touchy subject if you don't walk that line just right. So I can do without that in my books, especially my fantasy books, especially books where I value the story over the ideas, the personal ideas of the author. I don't really want to get into it, because I'm not really religious myself, and I don't have enough experience to speak about it. But I respect all of it, and I would never try to judge somebody for their religion, whatever they choose. I imagine there are a lot of Christian readers probably reading this, and if I were them, I'd feel offended. Same thing, if I was a man and I read this book, I would be offended. Like, what is the goal here? To offend 30% of your readers? By suggesting that they might choose what is or isn't holy depending on what's convenient for them? And I'm not saying any religion is perfect, okay? Each of them can be debated and picked at the entire time. It just seems like the intention here is to circle the flaws of it, instead of actually putting the focus on the whole magical girl aspect that you probably picked up the book for. She's like a passenger. to this whole entire thing, this whole book. Just like a passenger in her own story, disguised as just saying it's kind of ballsy to take this route instead of just sticking to fantasy magic. But maybe it wasn't strong enough because there was no structure to it. But then I guess that's why it's more of a historical fantasy and not just good fantasy. To be fair, there isn't so much of it to where it like completely derails the book. It's just so heavy-handed, underlined, bolded, to where it feels like a backhanded compliment. Like, here's an interesting story, but let's take a minute to remind you how flawed religion is. And maybe that works for some readers who is really into that and they have strong opinions on that. But for somebody like me who picks up a fantasy book just to read a good story, I don't prefer to read the author's personal opinions over the plot. I've dropped books in the past just because of this, where it felt like the book was just used as a vessel to get their inner feelings out. Babble, I'm looking at you. So that leads into genre confusion because between the historical fantasy and the actual fantasy, that it doesn't fully commit to some stuff. Take her heritage, for example. They have that whole Jewish thing I was talking about earlier, where they don't, it's almost like they don't know how to go into it, so they just don't. But they make sure to briefly mention it. And it's just there to remind you to check off the box to add more tension between the Christianity and the historical aspect of it. Since they do make sure to mention, be careful since drawing more attention to yourself is going to draw more attention to your background. It reads to me like somebody's trying to start shit and then walking away from it. If the book leaned more into the plot than the preachy and the lecture, the documentary stuff, I think it would have been a more fun read. This is not something I would probably read twice. Now let's talk about this forced romance. Because there is a romance in the book. You knew it was going to happen. You just didn't know when. So it wasn't a surprise when it did come. It was just it was the most boring part of the book. At least the other stuff gave you something to talk and debate about. This was just like, we need a romance, let's insert one. We have this creepy guy who shows up all of a sudden in her room, and she's just okay with that. And he just starts like insisting on helping her through this for no reason. He doesn't know her, he hasn't met her. He doesn't even tell her that he was told to do this. She just goes with it. Why? Because he's cute, because he's charming. Like, speaking of the tournament, can we even talk about why there is one at all? When I heard the word tournament, I imagined, I don't want to say Harry Potter, it's magic, it's like soft magic and stuff, but I want to say more like, there's going to be some action final. But no. But why can't he just take her directly to the king and be like, hey, sir, look what she can do? Surely, they're like, yeah, let's, we're going to compete and see, it's 4 competitors. We're going to see who can be the best here. And he might want her personally. Okay, cool, but if I'm king, I can hire all you guys. You can all work for me. Why the hell not? Why not just take her directly there and be like, hey, look what she can do? And he'd be like, cool, come join, I hired you. It's over, you're done. There just hasn't been much action up to this point, so it's like it was a strange shift all of a sudden. They're like, hey, we're going to have a tournament. Cool. And it almost felt YA in that aspect, where, there's always a ball, there's always a tournament, there's always stuff, there's stuff. But with the romance, there is a little bit of snark here and there that, it's like, she got him, he got her. It's kind of cute, but it's not enough to save it because there's no chemistry there. There was one part that I liked, where she called him out saying, well, you kill people, almost as in judging him. And he was like, yeah, well, we both work for people. Yours just orders you to do something different. And I really like that because it showed them that they are inherently similar with their circumstances and how they're both indebted or serve somebody. It just, their people oppress them in other ways. And, circumstances were different. She could easily be in the same position that he is. And I like that they can relate on that. Oh, and yes, there was one scene in here that was quite cringy. Like, honestly, this was a choice. There's an entire chapter dedicated to Lucia's hair. Yes, her hair. Okay, and I'm sure her hair is beautiful. It sounds lovely, it sounds great. But it starts with him walking into the room while we have these women around and they're discussing what they should do with her hair. Like, oh, it's messy. Should we cut it? Should we dye it? Should we just shave it off and put a wig on her? And he walks in and he's like, no, don't touch it at all. Don't touch her hair. In this like overly over the top dramatic way. And the other ladies gasp and they're like, oh my god. They're like, oh my god, he's, Mr. Tall and Quiet has an opinion. And then he just turned around and leaves, and that's it. There's no follow-up, no explanation. It's the weirdest shit. Why are we dedicating an entire chapter to this? If you're trying to pick it up for some like steamy romance, I'm going to say you're going to be disappointed. There's hardly any interaction or chemistry at all. They just sort of like get together and announce that they're together, and then when they do something here and there, there's just some awkward. You can if you want to. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And then like fade to black. It's YA. I mean that's YA down to the core. I don't know what else to tell you. It almost feels it's held back by the time period it's in because women are like it's inappropriate to talk a certain way, and the dude tries to be chivalrous, and it just comes off as really awkward. Okay, let's go back to the tournament, because this is one of the higher points in their story. This is where the book actually started to pull me back in after like these long periods of nothing happening. Most of it has just been people walking around, gossiping to each other, talking stuff, whispering, whatnot. But then we're suddenly in the throes of this tournament. And while all the competitors are very friendly off first glance, it's still a tournament. So you have to remember it's a competition. And there's this constant underlying threat that you have to be careful of how you perform, because there is always the risk of holy retribution. That if you come off as anything but the utmost holy, then you risk the wrath of the Spanish Inquisition and prison and being tortured and all this other stuff, and you really don't want to be a part of that. Even though, just throwing this out there, there is historical evidence that the Spanish Inquisition only ever executed 2 people for witchcraft. If I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, please let me know, but that's what I heard. Anyway, not saying they're not dicks, okay? But everyone in this tournament here is scheming for their own right, because that's how it goes. When, surprisingly, she navigates pretty well through this, from being just a servant or a cook, whatever. And they make it mention that, like, oh wow, she's so direct and that's so different. Yeah, I get that. But you're not brought up in that way of society. You're not used to playing that game as they have to. They have to constantly navigate through these waters of court politics. So somebody who's really into reading the whole court politics stuff, court drama, you will probably like that aspect to it. There's always this mystery in the background of who is actually trustworthy and who's just trying to use you, who's trying to get information. But this ends up not really affecting her too much because she's only ever really direct. She don't work in underhanded ways, and she handles all of the problems pretty head on, so they don't really get a chance to affect her that way. But the trials are where stuff actually starts happening. Because that's when you start to see some actual magic, and then they start to make you question whether it's holy or unholy, because some of it actually is dark, some of it is just illusion, some of it is real, some of it is, not. And at this point, I get what they're trying to say, because it's the same. Whether you're praying to the god or the devil, it's the same result no matter where it comes from, which I understand what they're trying to say. So they're pretty much just saying, like, oh yes, pretend you're Christian or else you're screwed, So she has to put on this holier than thou front, which it's kind of entertaining, but again, it's one of those things where you're walking a thin line. That being said, by the end of it, I thought there would be more impact on where it ended up, because that's where the book just sort of ends. And it's not what you would want. It ends up just being part of a whole overarching political scheme rather than a reward for her. But even when it doesn't come out to like this big payoff in the end, it's still fun while it lasts. It brings some much needed action and pacing to the book, which I appreciated. Even though there are some long wait periods in between trials. And I guess that leads me into the ending, which was pretty anticlimactic. I'll just wrap it up and say that, anticlimactic. It almost felt like it played out like a stage play, where it almost felt limited for some reason that I don't understand. The choices made by the characters weren't impossible to the point where it's like, oh, well, that's not believable. But it's just something that nobody would do in that circumstance, if you know what I mean. I don't want to like spoil it too much, but let's just say that your life is on the line, right? And instead of doing what you need to survive, as most people would, you throw a huge tantrum instead and say, oh no, well, I'm going to make you feel bad for 2 seconds before I die. Okay, but what is the point of that? You're still going to die, and they're going to wake up tomorrow forgetting about you. What is the point of that? Why not just do what you have to do? It comes back to that pride thing, which I understand, but is it really worth your life when you think about in like realistic expectations? Without giving away too much, again, the ending, it builds up like something dramatic and bad is going to happen, and then it just doesn't. It almost wraps it up like, okay, well, they lived happily ever after, and it's like, well, that's it. There was so much potential here, and it spends all this time exploring these cool themes like greed, pride, religion, and stuff. In the end, it felt like simplified down to this message for her saying, oh, well, I'm brave and I'm strong, so nothing bad's going to happen to me in the end. It's not really satisfying, and it's a very Disney princess way out of the book. So that's it. I mean, that's all I have to say about it. I'm disappointed. I was super excited when the book came out. I have a special edition. I have the fairy loot version. It has sprayed edges. It's signed. It's beautiful. And, I thought, oh, well, 6 Crows. And how much I love that book. I was automatic buy without even thinking. And there's some intriguing ideas in there about magic and power. So it's not like it's awful, it's trash, throw it. But it's just very weighed down by these vague world-building magic system stuff, these heavy-handed political opinions, and an ending that doesn't stick the landing, a romance that is pretty bland. And in the end, I still have a lot of questions, mostly about the magic and its origin. It just not much happens in the book. Well, it actually doesn't happen, and the book is thinner than you would think for something to tackle as much as it does. That might be the overarching issue here that I've seen some other people say is that the book is just too small for how long it needed to be. Most of the action is just people talking to each other, social commentary, gossip, sabotage. Everything feels more implied upon rather than acted out, especially when it comes to danger. They keep telling you there's this danger, and then it actually never comes until you expect it to come, which can make it drag at a bit sometimes. It started off very strong. Up until about halfway, it pulled me in. I wanted to see where it was going. But then it got just bogged down by these repetitive messages, slow pacing. And they ended up exactly where they should have, logically thinking about it. Because when you fly that close to the sun, eventually... But then they always get out of a situation almost as fast as they get into it. There are some really good quotes in here, too, and I wrote them down, and I don't have them with me at this point. I meant to go through them a little bit at a time, but you can find they're on Goodreads, and they're pretty good. They're clever, they're witty, which I really appreciate. If you're a fan of her work in general, or just like historical fantasy, I would say give it a shot. But don't go in with these high expectations of romance or fantasy or magic, because you might find yourself disappointed. And I think it's written on purpose. I think it's meant to spark conversation. So I would love to hear your thoughts about it. I don't want to hear none of that negative stuff, which is why I didn't enjoy it as much as I should have. Pretty much, the only things I can definitely say I enjoyed for sure was the concept of the theme of sins and the tournament itself, when stuff actually happened. Oh wait, and the writing. And the stuff I didn't enjoy that I talked about in here was the underused heritage thing, the criticism of men, the criticism of religion, the vague magic system, no chemistry romance. I'm 50-50 on the characters, so I'm not going to... And the ending. So that's it. That's all I have for this. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for rambling so long. And this is my first book of January for this year. Can you believe it? I'm actually trying to read a lot more. I slacked off a lot starting about halfway through last year. So I'm trying to pick this up again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.